If you're a well-adjusted person who's made the mistake of expressing your JRPG opinions on social media, you'll probably have heard this before.
Play a real Shin Megami Tensei game.
Said by someone with the worst profile picture you have ever seen. So what is a Shin Megami Tensei game anyway? In 1986 and 87, three giants of RPGs began their lives on the NES. The first was Dragon Quest, and late the next year came Final Fantasy. In between these releases was a much different kind of game. This game doesn't take place in a fantasy land where the protagonist needs to restore the light of the world or save the princess. Instead, the player takes on the role of a bullied high school kid who gets fed up with the abuse. Luckily, this takes place in Japan, so the American response is not available. Instead, our hero decides to develop a program that summons demons. Safe to say, things went awry. While not as popular as its fellow RPG giants, or even one of its spin-offs, Shin Megami Tensei has been at the forefront of turn-based RPGs for over 30 years now. In November of 2021, Shin Megami Tensei V was released as the latest entry in the mainline series. This new release has taken cues from both previous SMT games and the Persona series to create an amalgamation that should be a pleasure to both newcomers and longtime fans. Though some changes may rub one or the other the wrong way, anybody who has yet to play an SMT game and enjoys JRPGs would be wise to pick this game up. The Shin Megami Tensei mainline games are most noted for their difficulty. In most RPGs, you can either attack through an enemy and use healing until you win, but that is never the case in these games. The reputation is well earned and one of the main draws for someone bored of the difficulty level of a Final Fantasy or Pokemon. Usually when someone says play a real SMT game, they are saying play a more difficult RPG in the least graceful way possible. This established, the best place to start is combat. Shin Megami Tensei has one of the best turn-based combat systems in any game. The press turn system is a little bit complicated, but the accompanying footage should make this explanation more clear. Press turn works by turn icons. The number of these icons can vary for enemies, but for the player side, the number of icons is always equal to the number of team members summoned. Turns can be affected in several ways. There are elemental attacks in the game, which enemies can be weak or strong against. An opponent can have 5 states against any given type. These states are absorbing, nullifying, resisting, neutral affecting, or weakness. If the player has a full party summon, they will start with 4 icons. If they then use an elemental attack, it will affect the opponent based off of one of those 5 states. If the attack is absorbed, the player will lose all 4 of their icons, and their opponent's turn begins. If nullified, the player would lose 2 icons. If resisted, or the attack is neutral, then it will consume 1 turn. Where this becomes interesting is that if the opponent is weak to the element, the player will gain 1 turn. This can also be achieved by a critical hit from a physical attack. A new addition to combat is the Magatsuki system. Magatsuki functions in a similar way to the limit system from Final Fantasy, except affecting the entire party rather than individual party members. Several abilities can be used with a full bar, such as gaining extra experience or greatly reducing enemy damage for a turn. Though the skill you will use most often is the first one you will unlock, which makes every move for that set a critical hit. The main issue you'll run into is an ability that makes a full Magatsuki bar restore HP and MP every turn. This turns a mechanic that feels like it was expected to be a tactical mechanic in desperate moments into an ability seldom used because HP and MP restoration, along with proper debuffing, is significantly more efficient. Magatsuki can also be used by enemies. This will likely lead to some wipes in your first couple of hours of play, but once you realize you can guard through these and that every enemy only uses a certain move, then there isn't too much concern to be had. An aspect of combat most RPG players will have to get used to is the requirement for buffs and debuffs. Now, normal encounters are just what they sound like. If the battle begins on the player's turn and their party is properly leveled, there isn't much to it. In boss fights, this changes drastically. The question arises though, how many boss fights will you do throughout a typical playthrough? With all DLC installed, SMT5 has a total of 105 possible boss fights. The protagonist won't face all of these in a single playthrough. Nonetheless, this represents the massive number of times they will be faced with difficult battles. The typical flow of a new boss encounter will go like so. The first boss attempt is completely blind. With no knowledge of their weaknesses or abilities, the hero's proverbial ass is handed them on a proverbial plate. An issue that becomes obvious in the early game is that many boss battles feel unbelievably long. Boss battles in RPGs best serve gameplay as explorations of mechanic familiarity and as a puzzle. Similar to in dedicated puzzle games, Once you have a solution, there can be an awful lot of steps where you know exactly what you're doing and now are simply going through the physical motions you went through mentally several minutes ago. A boss with a large pool of HP indeed has more time to pull tricks out of its sleeve, though in the early game of S&T 5, this often can just become a test of how much MP your team has. This length is added to by changes to status buffs and debuffs. Rather than lasting the entire battle, stat changes only last 3 total turns, and can only be changed plus or minus 2 as a maximum. It seems as though this change intended to push players to use status element abilities more often, but a properly built team is going to be much more useful. This assumption is backed up by the vast quantity of available status ailments, but through play, you will find most boss encounters resist several, if not all, such ailments, so regular debuffs are more effective. A new item, Dampeners, which make the party immune to a certain element for a full turn, is likely meant to paste over some of these cracks. Though, when you consider the way press turn works, this doesn't make much sense. Say you know an enemy is going to use a lightning move when they activate their Magasuki. Then you can use a dampener and effectively negate a move that is intended to be powerful. One can simply choose not to use dampeners and is likely the better route to do so. Much of the fun of Shin Megami Tensei comes from the team building, and negating a boss's strongest move is not conducive to that experience. 234 demons make up the full roster of possible teammates in S&T 5. To put this in perspective, that is more unique partners than any Pokemon game before Generation 5. Demons are varied greatly, each has its own set of resistances and weaknesses, as well as stat spreads. This is complemented by skill potential. All non-standard attacks have MP cost, and the higher the potential in a particular element, the lower the cost. There is also negative potential, in which a skill costs more. There are 2 ways to add new demons to your roster. The first of these is negotiation. Negotiation functions as a small puzzle. Once you have a group of enemies down to just one opponent, it is possible to talk to them. Every demon has a somewhat unique personality. They will ask questions, and depending on their personality, they will expect a certain set of responses. Get these correct and the demon will ask for something. This can range from money and items to slices of your HP and MP. If they are pleased with your offerings, they will join your party. The second is what makes SMT arguably the most interesting team building RPG series. That ability is Demon Fusion. This is one of the most unique party creation mechanics in any game. Through fusion, you can combine different demons. When combining, you can transfer skills into a new demon. In addition, every new demon captured or created will register to a Copendinium, which will be able to recall demons for future fusions or to add back to your party. Without this ability, multiple boss fights would be impossible. Take an example from the first major boss. Hydra is weak to ice and nullifies fire attacks. Its moves are physical, dark, and fire. So the goal would be to fuse demons that both nullify fire and have ice attacks. By doing this, you will be able to maximize your turns while minimizing Hydra's turns. Though this strategy alone will still lead to a quick loss. That is because buffs and debuffs are going to be necessary, and ensuring you use your skill slots for these will lead to some tough decisions even through the late game. There is more to pay attention to when adding skills in SMT5 from previous entries with the addition of skill potential. Based mostly on weaknesses and resistances, each demon will have a different set of positive and negative potentials. If you choose a demon that is fire-based, they will likely have more potential in fire skills and less in ice. Damage calculations still are based on the associated skill stat, but the MP cost will either be more or less based on the demon's affinities. To create more interesting demons, SMT5 also has a system for essence fusions. Essences can be obtained in several ways. This is a way to add new abilities to demons without fusing it into a new one. They can even be used to apply affinities to the player character. If you are interested in keeping a certain demon around, you can make an early game demon strong enough for the late game. On top of typical leveling, some items improve your party. Sutras can be used to improve skill potential, and instances can be used to improve individual stats. Bombs increase stats for the player character, but skill potential is upgraded through miracles. Miracles are unlockables that can affect everything from Magasuki skills to demon negotiations and fusion. To activate miracles, you first need to unlock the ability to purchase them. To do this, you will need to go through an abscess battle. No, not like the ones on TikToks, but a type of boss encounter in which you will have to avoid waves of enemies who always have priority in attacking order. Often these can be located in extremely narrow areas, so avoiding these enemies is nearly impossible. The abscesses also have ties to unique battles, which contain demons from an area the player is yet to reach and will usually outlevel the player. Upon defeating an abscess, you will unlock a set of miracles for purchase. These are purchased through a currency known as glory, which can be gathered a few ways. If you wish to unlock every miracle available, you are in for a bit of a grind. Most points will go into skill potential upgrades, so choosing your build early will be beneficial. Overall, the combat is as good as it's ever been in Shin Megami Tensei. The new additions feel more like an experiments, and while interesting, don't add too much. If there is any benefit, that comes mostly in the form of accessibility, which is great for newcomers. The experience that SMT brings at its base is so great that any manipulation can't shake it. Simply revealed as SMT HD when first announced in 2017, Atlus made it clear that they wanted the new SMT game to be renowned for its graphics. Unreal 4 and its associated plugins, one just for the hair effects, make for an amazing looking game on the Nintendo Switch. The style that SMT is known for is on full display. The environments and demons look great. The one unfortunate part is, as you progress through the game, you will find the environments become samey. Most of the maps are entirely sand and broken down buildings. In this, a lot of the potential appeal of the graphics is lost. A surprising disappointment was the soundtrack. Megami Tensei OSTs tend to lean towards a metal focus, but usually more Megadeth, whereas 5's soundtrack seemed to be more Avenged Sevenfold. No particular track is especially bad, but there aren't many standouts. After a few hours, it feels like a lot of guitar noise with little to pique your interest. It's odd that a game with a development cycle long enough that fans wondered about cancellation has a huge problem with diversity in both environments and music. It is obvious that a lot of the work was focused on remaking models, and a great job was done with that. Though when a game's full of gods and demons from separate dimensions, it comes off a bit bland to listen to the same set of sounds while going through similar environments. The new engine has allowed for some drastic changes to somewhat old format. The first thing introduced is the new movement system. Sprinting allows for more fluid movement around large map areas. There's also jumping added in for navigating the now more vertical maps and platforming sections. Another new feature is the removal of random encounters in favor of enemies that appear live on the map. Accompanying this is a surprise mechanic that affects whether your party or the enemy party has first turn. The one negative to this system is that some of the staple difficulty is diminished when you can simply avoid encounters. A major factor that is missing is dungeons. There are only 2 true dungeons in the game. There seemed to be an aim to turn some of the open areas into some kind of mini dungeon, but it doesn't hit the target, especially with the previously discussed lack of variety in open environments. Neither dungeon is particularly long or features interesting puzzles. A variety of challenging dungeons are certainly missed. My curiosity is only furthered in this regard with the slight performance issues on the Switch. There is nothing major, but there is some stuttering when a good number of enemies appear at once, especially the larger ones. More indoor environments would have aided this greatly. While movement across open maps is good, you'll spend most of your time navigating the map by a series of checkpoints. Generally, this system is boring. Most of the sense of danger is removed when your ability to save or recover is never outside of arm's reach. Most major boss battles are located near these checkpoints, so they turn into holes in space you constantly orbit around. To add to this, early in the game you will gain the ability to instantly return to your last used save point with just a click of a button. These checkpoints contain not only recovery and saving, but also the shop and the World of Shadows. Rather than physical locations to visit, these are accessed through a menu. This change is more convenient, but it removes any kind of character these locations could have had. A woman standing in a dark room or a corpse in a pile of gold sounds interesting, but isn't so much when you can click a button in a menu prompt to get there. There is just an amount of charm that is missing. SMT V also adds in several navigators that will accompany you throughout the game. The positive part of this is that they can discover useful items hidden on the map. Occasionally these hidden spots will feature battles with opponents that provide good chunks of experience. These are nice, but with the world so demolished, it seems like the aim should have been to isolate the player. Instead, navigators are constantly chirping at you. While fun, the movement and map spaces are a bit rudimentary. Variety is deeply needed and more dungeons would have added to that. The checkpoint system is convenient, but that seems counterintuitive to the difficulty goals of the game. Navigators would have been better left out. The last thing to address is the story itself. The first thing to understand is the forces that drive the story of Shin Megami Tensei games. In most, there are 3 paths to follow. These are law, chaos, and neutral. Throughout the game, you will have choices to make that align with one of these. Some SMT games are deeply dedicated to these through lines. Luckily, SMT V isn't so much, and that is to its benefit. There are a few choices in the main story that affect alignment, but there are a good number of side quests that play into it as well. As far as I can tell, the only thing affected by your alignment is a single in-game quest. The actual alignment choice for the ending is made before entering the final area. This can feel a little odd as someone going through the game siding only with chaos and side quests can choose the law ending. A player even can just save before making that choice and repetitively reload to see the 3 main endings. If you simply want to see the 3 endings, this is the best way to do it because there's no value to be found in the story. While there are some minor issues with combat and exploration, there are almost no redeeming qualities for the story. The biggest problem is an absolute lack of stakes. In the first 15 minutes of the game, your character and a couple of their classmates awaken a destroyed Tokyo filled with demons. Your character is endowed with their powers, you see one of your classmates get kidnapped by an angel who outright says they will be safe. You run into the other classmate later only to find out that they are an experienced demon summoner and don't need you. Don't get too acquainted with these classmates though, as they essentially show up a half dozen times and say a line or two. Through the story, the protagonist will be presented with ways in which the world can be revived. The cataclysmic decision comes down to siding with the forces of God, the whims of demons, or rejecting both. To keep this review spoiler free, that is as far as I will go in specifics. It is worth mentioning that there is an interesting twist thrown into the plot, and no matter what choice you make at the end, the final bosses are underwhelming to say the least. There is a hidden ending in this game that will require a New Game Plus playthrough to complete, and this final battle is more engaging. Though, in a typical anime fashion, this adds another twist to make your enemy even more powerful, but not in an interesting way. This is a game where a war is waging between the forces of God and Lucifer. The story shouldn't feel like the worst part. At no point in time do you feel like there isn't time for you to run around and grind or find collectibles. There are no stakes at all, and the decision at the end only adds to that. All said and done, there are some clear pros and cons to this game. The clearest of the pros is the combat. It is the reason you play. Great team building options around that combat only improve it further. The game itself looks great, the models are lively. The map areas, while lacking diversity, are still interesting and fun to traverse. The Switch is a great home for RPGs. While there are some extremely minor performance issues, generally the game runs great, and the option to take such a grindy game on the go is a positive. As far as what this game lacks, the story is a problem. There is absolutely no meat to the story. The alignments having no play into the story only makes it worse. There are no strong characters in this story, and yet with no meaningful decision making until the last 30 minutes of the game, the player character doesn't become a medium. The rubric I always like to use when it comes to buying a new game is pretty simple. A good game should provide 1 hour of engaging gameplay for each dollar that you pay for the game. For a casual player, this is somewhere the SMT franchise tends to fall short. Unless you plan on doing a New Game Plus run, a typical normal difficulty playthrough will only take 35 to 45 hours. Currently, SMT 5 is listed at a base of $60, and with all DLC it runs $85. This DLC adds to this runtime a decent bit by providing new boss battles, but when the demand is adding 25 hours, almost any kind of DLC is going to fall short of this, especially when in reality it at best adds an hour or two. The other problem with the DLC is that there is no indication as to when the player is supposed to do these battles. The Fiend battles return from Nocturne. These unlock one after another and range from level 24 to 99. The 3 other battles are all unlocked at once, when you'll be around level 30, and range from level 37 to the high 70s. If you're willing to look past the price for the positives I mentioned previously, then this game can be worth it. The extra price of the DLC seems exorbitant when it adds a parsley 12 boss battles and easier grinding. I say this with 9 of those boss battles being some of my favorite in the series. This pricing model reminds me of when Atlas listed a half-finished PC port of a game that came out in 2003 for $70 with DLC. In conclusion, if you get a certain part of your brain itched by difficult turn-based combat and intricate team building, then SMT 5 is absolutely a game you should pick up. If you are coming to RPGs to enjoy a rich story with gripping characters, I would consider this a pass. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe because I do have more like it coming soon. I hope you have a wonderful day.